The plane came back on a Tuesday. I know because I'd been marking days on the wall of the FAA regional office at PDX with a grease pencil. And I'd just drawn the 31st line when the tower frequency dead for 19 days broke open with the automated squawk of a Boeing 737-800 on final approach. ILS locked, glide slope captured, doing everything a commercial aircraft is supposed to do when a competent crew is flying it. No crew was flying it. I need to say that clearly because everything that follows depends on you understanding the distinction between what the instruments reported and what was physically true. The transponder identified the aircraft as Alaska Airlines Flight 209, SEA-TAC to Honolulu. Departed 30 days prior with 143 passengers and 6 crew. It had been declared missing on day 2. By day 5, the families had been told to assume total loss. By day 12, nobody was left at the NTSB regional office to investigate anything because the outbreak had emptied the building the same way it had emptied the hospitals, the schools, the precinct stations, and eventually the neighborhoods around them, except for me. My name is Nora Carver. I suppose I still am, a senior air safety investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board, Western Pacific Regional Office. 22 years of service. I've worked 61 major incidents. I was the IIC on the Klamath Falls Mid-Air in 2019 and the lead structures analyst on the Alaska Range CFIT case in 2021. I say this not to impress you, but to establish that my entire professional existence has been organized around a single skill: reconstructing events from physical evidence when the witnesses are dead. The witnesses are always dead. That is the nature of my work. You arrive after the event. You read the metal and the glass and the data recorders, and you build backward from wreckage to causation. I have never once needed a survivor to explain what happened. The aircraft tells you. The aircraft always tells you, if you know how to listen. Flight 209 landed at 14:07 local time on runway 28L. I watched from the tower cab, where I'd been living for 11 days, because the elevation gave me sight lines, and the reinforced door gave me security. Through the Leupold spotting scope I'd taken from a dead TSA supervisor's office, I watched the 737 flare, touch down, and rolled to a stop on the center line with the precision of an autoland system executing exactly as designed. The engine spooled down. The auxiliary power unit kicked on. The cabin lights illuminated, row by row, the way they do during a normal arrival sequence. Nothing moved inside. I waited 4 hours. I am not brave, and I am not impulsive. And 30 days of surviving alone, inside an airport, had taught me that the space between seeing something and approaching it is where most people stop being alive. I glassed the aircraft from every angle the tower allowed. I watched for movement in the cockpit windows. I watched the passenger windows for shadow or shift. I checked the inflatable slides all stowed. I checked the cargo doors all closed. The forward cabin door remained sealed. At 1800, I made the decision to descend. I packed my field kit the way I'd packed it for every crash site I'd ever walked. Digital recorder, camera, nitrile gloves, evidence bags, headlamp, and the NTSB Form 6120.1 accident report template. Because even at the end of the world, I'm the kind of person who brings the correct form. I also packed the Mossberg 590 I'd taken from the airport police armory, which is not standard NTSB equipment, but which had become standard for me since the morning I'd watched a group of infected ground crew walk a fueler truck into the side of Concourse C and burn half the terminal. I descended the tower stairwell in the dark. The emergency lighting had failed 2 weeks ago. I counted steps because I'd memorized the count. 94 steps to the ground floor. Left turn, 40 paces to the exterior door. The tarmac was empty. The plane sat 3,000 feet away, lit from within, completely still. It looked like a house with the lights on and dinner waiting, every window glowing. I walked toward it with my recorder running. I am trained to approach wreckage. This was not wreckage. That was the first problem. The air bridge at Gate C4 still had hydraulic power because the APU on the 737 was feeding it through the ground power connection. I watched it extend toward the aircraft's forward door from inside the gate area, where I crouched behind a check-in podium and waited for any response to the mechanical noise. Nothing. The terminal around me was dark, stripped, abandoned. Dried blood stains near the Starbucks kiosk. An overturned wheelchair near the moving walkway. The ordinary archaeology of evacuation. I had seen the infected only twice since retreating to the tower. Once a group of 7 moving east along the taxiway, in that specific gait, not running, not walking, but that locked hip stride that covers ground without apparent effort. Once a single figure standing motionless on the roof of the rental car facility for 6 hours before walking north and disappearing. They had thinned around the airport after the fires. Not enough living bodies to hold their attention. I'd built my survival around that arithmetic. Stay where the living aren't, and the infected have no reason to be. The air bridge seated against the fuselage with a pressurized thump. I gave it 10 minutes. Then I walked the bridge in the dark, Mossberg forward, headlamp off, moving by touch along the handrail, until I felt the aircraft door under my fingertips. It was warm. Not residual heat warm. Actively warm, the way an aircraft door feels when the cabin environmental system is running and the packs are pushing conditioned air. I found the external release handle, rotated it, and the door swung inward on its own weight. The smell hit me first, not decay, not blood, not the chemical stink of discharged fire extinguishers or the kerosene taint of fuel vapor. The cabin smelled like a normal aircraft. Recirculated air, carpet fiber, the faint synthetic note of seat fabric, and underneath it all, something I hadn't encountered since before the outbreak. The ambient human scent of a recently occupied space. Skin oil, shampoo residue, coffee. But the cabin was empty. I stepped through first class. 8 seats, all upright, all empty. Seatbelts unbuckled, tray tables stowed, overhead bins closed. I moved aft through the forward galley. The coffee maker held fresh brew, hot, viscerally impossible. 2 cups sat in the holder, poured, with cream clouding through one of them. I touched the ceramic. Warm. I almost left. I want to be honest about that. I stood in that galley with my hand on a warm coffee cup, inside an aircraft that had been missing for 30 days. And every investigative reflex I'd spent 2 decades developing told me to retreat, seal the bridge, and observe from distance. The scene was wrong in a way I had never encountered. And I have encountered scenes where aircraft came apart at 37,000 feet and left debris fields across 4 counties. Wreckage does not frighten me. Impossibility does. I did not leave. I kept the recorder running, and I moved aft. Main cabin, 27 rows, 162 seats, every one empty, every seatbelt unbuckled, every window shade raised to the same position halfway. The overhead bins were closed. The reading lights were on, all of them, casting individual cones down onto seats that held the impressions of bodies recently removed. The fabric was compressed, warm. I pressed my palm into seat 14C and felt the heat of a person who had been sitting there minutes ago. 143 passengers, 6 crew, gone. No blood, no torn fabric, no signs of struggle, no deployed oxygen masks, no opened emergency exits, no disturbed carpet. The lavatories were all vacant, all unlocked. The aft galley held a full service cart, meal trays loaded, foil sealed, as if the crew had been preparing for a beverage service that never began. I found the first piece of physical evidence in row 19. A child's coloring book, open to a half-finished page. Purple crayon, still resting in the gutter of the spine. The page showed a cartoon elephant. The child had colored carefully inside the lines, then stopped mid-stroke. The crayon mark trailed off the elephant's ear and down the page in a smooth, unhurried line, as if the hand holding it had simply ceased to exist without any interruption in momentum. I bagged the coloring book. My hands were shaking. The recorder was still running, and I could hear my own breathing on it, shallow and too fast. I had to get to the cockpit. The cockpit door was locked from the inside, which is standard procedure. The reinforced door installed after 2001 is designed to resist forcible entry for a sustained period. I did not need to force it. I knew the emergency access code, a 5-digit sequence provided to NTSB investigators for crash site access, and I entered it on the keypad. The lock disengaged with an electronic chirp. I pushed the door open with the Mossberg's barrel because I had no intention of putting my body across that threshold before I'd cleared the space visually. The cockpit was lit by instrument glow, both seats empty, both harnesses unbuckled and hanging loose. The yoke positions were neutral. The throttles were at idle. The autopilot was engaged and had been for the duration of the approach. The flight management system showed the ILS-28L approach loaded, executed, and completed. The parking brake was set. The aircraft had landed itself. I slid into the left seat because that is where the captain sits and where the primary flight data interface lives. The screens were alive. Every system nominal. Fuel state, 1,400 pounds remaining in the center tank, which was almost empty but mathematically consistent with a 30-day flight time if the aircraft had been flying fuel-efficient profiles at high altitude in a racetrack pattern. I pulled the flight management computer's route page. What I saw did not make sense. The FMC showed a single waypoint, entered manually, labeled Home. Coordinates, 45.5887 north, 122.5975 west, Portland International Airport. The route had been entered 30 days ago, according to the timestamp, which meant someone had punched it in on the day of departure. Except the filed flight plan, I'd memorized it from the pre-outbreak NTSB briefing packet, called for direct routing to Honolulu via oceanic waypoints. Someone had deleted the original route and replaced it with a single point. Home. The cockpit voice recorder would tell me what happened. The flight data recorder would give me parameters. Both boxes sat in their cradles in the aft electronics bay, intact, accessible. I could pull them, bring them back to the tower, and play them on the portable CVR reader I'd salvaged from the regional office. That was the professional protocol. That was what Nora Carver, senior investigator, 22 years, 61 incidents, was trained to do. Then I found the logbook. It sat on the center pedestal between the throttle quadrant and the radio stack. A standard leather-bound pilot's logbook, open to a page of handwritten entries. The captain's log. I recognized the format: date, route, aircraft tail number, flight time, remarks. The entries covered the 30 days since departure. Each day had a single line. The handwriting changed, not gradually, not the way handwriting degrades under fatigue or stress. The first 7 entries were written in a steady, professional hand. Captain's script, precise block letters. The remarks column noted fuel state, weather, and system status. Day 8, the handwriting shifted to something rounder, softer. A different person. Day 12, it changed again, cramped, left-leaning. The pen pressing hard enough to score the paper. Day 19, the writing became large and childlike. Day 24, it was barely legible. Day 29, the last entry before today, was a single word written in letters so large, they filled the entire remarks column. Ready. Day 30 today had one entry. The handwriting was mine. I don't mean it resembled mine. I mean it was mine. I have signed my name on 614 official NTSB documents over 22 years, and I know my handwriting the way I know my own face. The entry read, "Nora will understand. Seat 7A. Don't open it here." I had not written it. I had not been on this aircraft. I had been in the control tower at PDX for 11 days and in the FAA regional office for 19 days before that. I had not lost time. I had not blacked out. I had 31 grease pencil marks on a wall to prove my continuous presence. I tore the page out of the logbook and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I went back to seat 7A. The seat pocket held a sealed manila envelope with my name on it in my handwriting. I took it and left the aircraft without opening it. I was running. I did not open the envelope for 9 hours. I sat in the tower cab with every door locked and the Mossberg across my lap, and the envelope on the console next to the radar display that hadn't shown a target in 19 days. And I did not touch it. I ate a can of pears with a plastic fork. I drank water from the 5-gallon jug I'd carried up from the terminal commissary. I watched the 737 through the spotting scope as the sun went down and the cabin lights stayed on, glowing against the darkening tarmac like a lantern left burning in an empty room. The infected appeared at dusk. 3 of them, crossing the runway from the east, moving in that synchronized cadence that I had never been able to watch without my chest tightening. They passed within 200 feet of the aircraft. None of them turned toward it. They continued west toward the river as if the plane did not exist. As if 162 warm, recently occupied seats, radiating human scent into the open air or through the door I'd left ajar, were beneath their detection threshold. That was wrong. The infected are drawn to warmth and human residue. I had watched them converge on a running car from half a mile away. I had watched one stand outside the tower base for 3 hours because I'd left a jacket near the ground floor vent. But 3 of them walked past a cabin that smelled like 143 living people and did not deviate. I opened the envelope at 3 o'clock because I could not sleep, and because not opening it was worse than opening it. Inside, 6 pages of dense handwritten text. My handwriting, my phrasing, my technical vocabulary. The document was structured as an NTSB preliminary findings report, Form 6120.1, the same form I'd packed in my field kit, and it was filled out with the precision and formatting conventions I use in every report I file. Incident classification, aircraft identification, narrative sequence, probable cause. The report described what had happened to Flight 209. I will not reproduce the full document here because some of what it contained has implications I'm still unwilling to distribute. But the narrative section described the following sequence. At cruise altitude over the Pacific, approximately 4 hours after departure, the cabin pressure system registered a transient anomaly. Not a decompression, not a failure. A fluctuation in atmospheric composition that the environmental control system logged as a sensor error and automatically corrected. The correction took 11 seconds. During those 11 seconds, the passengers stopped. The report used that word. Stopped. Not died, not collapsed, not lost consciousness. Stopped, the way a clock stops, mechanism intact, energy present, motion ceased. The report described it as a suspension event. The crew observed passengers frozen mid-gesture. The flight attendant in the forward galley observed a woman holding a coffee cup with liquid suspended partway between the cup and her lips, motionless, not falling. The captain called a mayday. The first officer began emergency descent procedures. Then the crew stopped too. One at a time. First officer first, then the captain, then the 3 flight attendants in sequence from aft to forward. The report described each cessation with clinical specificity. Time frames, seat positions. The last flight attendant, the report identified her as Maria Souza, based in Seattle, 11 years with the airline, was on the interphone calling operations when she stopped mid-syllable. The aircraft flew itself for 30 days. The autopilot held altitude. Fuel management kept the engines running at minimum consumption. And the flight management computer executed a racetrack pattern over the open Pacific until fuel state required a divert. Then, and this is where the report shifted from improbable to impossible, the FMC reprogrammed itself. No human input. The system deleted the Honolulu routing, entered the waypoint labeled Home, and initiated an approach to PDX. The report's probable cause finding, written in my own handwriting in the precise format I have used for 22 years, read, "The suspension and removal of all persons aboard was caused by atmospheric exposure to an agent consistent with the mechanism responsible for the current outbreak, operating in an airborne vector at altitude. The agent does not kill. It edits." I read that word 17 times. Edits. I did not go back to the aircraft the next morning. I went to the NTSB regional office instead, because the flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder readers were there, and because I needed to verify the report's claims against the physical data, and because professional protocol is the only architecture I have left when my understanding of the world fails. The regional office was a 12-minute walk from the tower, through the operations area and across the employee parking lot. I'd made the trip 14 times since the outbreak began. The route was clear. I'd verified it each time with binoculars before descending. And the airport's open sight lines made ambush geometry nearly impossible. Today I moved faster than usual because the overnight hours had installed a specific dread in my chest that I had not felt since the first week, when the nature of the infected was still unconfirmed, and every shadow could have been a person or a former person, and you could not tell from distance. The office was untouched. My colleagues had evacuated in an orderly fashion. During the first week, I found the sign-out sheet on the reception desk. 12 signatures, dated March 15th, destination listed as the FEMA Coordination Center in Salem. I don't know if they made it. The phone stopped working on March 18th and the cell networks followed on March 20th. I set up the portable CVR reader at my desk, my actual desk, with my family photo and my commendation plaques and my coffee mug that says, NTSB, we show up after, and connected it to the cockpit voice recorder I'd pulled from the 737's electronics bay during a second visit to the aircraft just after dawn. The FDR unit went into the separate reader beside it. Both units were intact, data cards undamaged. Standard 30-day loop on the CVR, which meant I had the full record. I pressed play. The first 4 hours were normal. Routine crew communication, call-outs, altitude checks. A brief exchange about a Seahawks trade that made the first officer laugh. The senior flight attendant called the cockpit to report a passenger in 31E who wanted to know if they could see Mauna Kea from the left side. The captain said probably not at this latitude, but he'd let them know. Normal, human. The sounds of people doing a job inside a machine that works. At 4 hours, 11 minutes, the cabin pressure anomaly occurred. I heard the environmental system cycle a low hum, shifting frequency for 11 seconds. Then silence. Not the silence of a dead recorder. The silence of an open microphone in a space where no one is making sound. The engines were audible. The air system was audible. No human sound. Then the captain's voice. What the hell? First officer. They're not. Are they breathing? Captain. Call it in. Call it in now. The sound of the satellite phone being lifted from its cradle. The captain's voice giving the Mayday declaration clear, professional, exactly as trained. Aircraft identification, position, nature of emergency. All passengers appear to be, I don't have a word for it. They're in their seats, eyes open, no movement, no response to stimulus. The first officer's breathing changed at 4 hours 14 minutes. The captain said his name twice. Roberts, Roberts. Then, oh God, not you too. I listened to the captain fly alone for 19 minutes. He maintained the Mayday call. He described what he saw in the cabin through the cockpit door's peephole. He said the overhead lights were still on, and every passenger was sitting upright, with their eyes open and their hands in whatever position they'd been in when it happened. He said a woman in row 6 was holding a pen above a crossword puzzle, and the pen was not moving and was not falling. He said the word suspended 3 times. At 4 hours, 33 minutes, the captain said, I can feel it. It's in the cockpit now. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. His last recorded words were, Tell Ann I wasn't scared. Then 25 days, 18 hours, and 47 minutes of engine noise, air circulation, and the periodic click of the autopilot adjusting trim. I sat at my desk and listened to all of it. Every second. I need to explain what edits means because the report used that word, and I initially rejected it as metaphorical. I am not a metaphorical thinker. I reconstruct events from evidence. I build causal chains from physical data. I have never once, in 61 investigations, attributed an accident to something I could not measure. The flight data recorder showed me what the word meant. Passenger weight. The FDR logs total aircraft weight at continuous intervals for center of gravity calculations. At the moment of the cabin anomaly, the aircraft weighed 142,370 pounds. 11 seconds later, it weighed 118,940 pounds. The difference, 23,430 pounds, was the combined mass of 143 passengers and 6 crew members. They did not move to another part of the aircraft. They did not exit through doors or breaches. The fuselage was intact. The doors were sealed. The cargo holds were pressurized and undisturbed. The weight simply ceased to be present. Not ejected, not consumed, not displaced, removed, edited from the aircraft the way you delete a word from a sentence, leaving the grammar intact and the meaning altered. Their belongings remained: carry-on bags, phones, wallets, shoes, and this detail is the one that stayed with me through the night and has not released me since, shoes still on the floor beneath seats, laced, as though feet had been withdrawn upward through them without disturbing the knot. Jewelry on seats. A watch on the armrest of 22A, clasp still closed, size to a wrist no longer present. I cataloged everything. I spent 2 full days on the aircraft with my evidence kit, working row by row, photographing and bagging items the way I would at any crash site. The discipline helped. The familiar procedure kept my hands steady and my thoughts sequential. I documented 412 personal items. I mapped their positions against the seat manifest I'd retrieved from the airline's operations server, which was still running on backup power in the Alaska Airlines office downstairs. Every item was in its correct seat. Every personal effect corresponded to the passenger assigned to that position. The editing, I had started using the word without quotation marks by then, which tells you something about how quickly the impossible becomes operational vocabulary when the evidence insists had been precise. It had taken the people and left everything that was not a person. On the third day, someone knocked on the tower door. I had the Mossberg in my hands before the second knock, pressed against the wall beside the reinforced door, breathing through my mouth to stay quiet. Nobody had knocked on any door in my world for 26 days. The infected don't knock. They don't have the purposeful intent that knocking requires. Hello? I saw lights up here last night. Female voice. Young, strained but coherent. I'm from the Red Cross shelter at the convention center. My name is Dana Reyes. I'm a paramedic. I'm alone, and I'm not sick. I opened the door with the shotgun pointed at the floor between us. She was maybe 30, thin in the way everyone was thin now, wearing a Red Cross vest over a fleece pullover, holding a bicycle helmet in one hand. Her eyes went to the Mossberg, then to my face, then to the wall behind me where 33 grease pencil marks tracked the days. You've been here the whole time, she said. Yes. How? Carefully. She looked past me at the tower cab, at my sleeping bag, my canned food supply, the spotting scope on its tripod aimed at the runway. Then her eyes found the 737, still parked on 28L, still illuminated, still impossible. That plane, she said. We saw it land, from the convention center roof. 2 of us came to check. The other one, Marcus, he didn't make it across the bridge. She did not elaborate. She didn't need to. The bridge she meant was the Glenn Jackson, Interstate 205. And I had watched the infected presence on that span increase daily through my scope. Marcus had not made it. Dana had. Have you been inside the plane? She asked. Yes. Was there anyone on it? No. She nodded slowly. That's what I was afraid of. Dana had information I did not have, and I had evidence she had not seen. And for the first 48 hours of our coexistence in the tower, we exchanged both with the cautious precision of 2 professionals who understood that accuracy mattered more than comfort. The convention center's shelter held 309 people as of 5 days ago when Dana left. Organized, functional, running on generator power and a water filtration system built by a retired civil engineer named Wallace Pratt, who had, according to Dana, simply stood up during the first community meeting and started assigning tasks as though the apocalypse were a construction project that needed a foreman. Medical capacity was limited. Donna and 1 physician's assistant, a man named Yun Seo Park, were the entire clinical staff, but the shelter had avoided the collapse pattern that had consumed the Oregon Convention Center's East Hall, where a secondary shelter had dissolved into chaos during the second week when the infected breached a loading dock. 300 people saw that plane land, Dana said. Wallace sent me because I'm the fastest on the bike routes, and because he wants to know if it's safe, if the plane is clean, if we can use it. Use it for what? Wallace thinks we can fly people out. There's a group, maybe 40, who have a pilot, former military. He says he can fly a 737 if the aircraft is functional. I looked at her across the console. The idea was not irrational. The aircraft was mechanically sound. The engines had run for 30 continuous days without maintenance intervention, which should have been impossible, but which the FDR data confirmed. The fuel state was low, but PDX had fuel trucks on the ramp, and the hydrant system might still have pressure. In theory, a qualified pilot could fly the aircraft to a destination outside the outbreak zone if such a destination existed, which no one at the convention center or anywhere else could confirm because communications had been down for weeks. The aircraft is functional, I said. I've reviewed the system's data. Everything is nominal. Then we can use it. I didn't say that. I showed her the report. Not the envelope, I wasn't ready for that, but my own preliminary findings, the ones I'd typed on the battery-powered laptop I'd retrieved from the office. I showed her the weight data, the CVR transcript, the 11-second anomaly, the cabin that smelled like people who had been there minutes before I boarded, 30 days after they'd disappeared. Dana read everything with the focused silence of someone accustomed to processing clinical information under pressure. When she finished, she set the laptop down and looked at the 737 through the tower windows. You're saying the plane did something to the passengers? I'm saying the passengers were removed by a mechanism I cannot identify, operating through the environmental control system during an 11-second atmospheric anomaly. And you think that mechanism is still in the plane? I don't know. I've been aboard 3 times. Nothing has happened to me. Then maybe it's spent. Maybe it was a one-time event. Maybe. I have no evidence either way. Dana stood up and walked to the window. The 737 sat where it had been for 3 days, lights still burning, APU still running, patient as architecture. Beyond it, the airport stretched in every direction. Empty runways, dead terminals, the burned skeleton of Concourse C, and past the perimeter fence, the city of Portland in its new configuration of silence and scattered movement, and the occasional column of smoke, marking some conflict or collapse I could not interpret from this distance. 300 people, she said. 40 of them are children. The food supply lasts maybe 2 more weeks. Wallace has the group organized, but he can't manufacture calories. That plane seats 162 people. 2 trips and everyone's out. Out to where? Boise. There are reports shortwave, unconfirmed, of a military safe zone at Mountain Home Air Force Base. Unconfirmed. Everything is unconfirmed, Nora. Confirmed ended a month ago. She was right, and I hated it because she was asking me to make a determination I was not qualified to make, which was, is this aircraft safe for human occupation? I am qualified to determine why aircraft fail, not whether the invisible thing that emptied one will do it again. Wallace Pratt arrived 4 days later with an escort of 11 people, including the pilot, a woman named Jaylin Cho, who had flown C-17S for the Air National Guard, and who looked at the 737 the way I probably look at evidence, with professional hunger sharpened by personal dread. They'd made the trip from the convention center on bicycles, following a route Dana had mapped through the industrial district south of the airport, where the infected presence was lowest. They lost no one on the transit, which Wallace attributed to discipline and which Dana attributed to luck. I met them at the base of the tower and led them up in groups of 3 because the stairwell was narrow, and I did not want 12 people in a confined space with a single exit. Wallace was 67. White beard, wire-frame glasses, the bearing of a man who had spent 40 years managing large-scale construction projects and had simply applied the same methodology to the end of the world. He shook my hand with a grip that communicated nothing about warmth and everything about structural integrity. Ms. Carver, Dana says you've investigated the aircraft. I have. And your findings? The aircraft is mechanically sound. The passengers were removed by an unknown mechanism. I cannot certify the aircraft as safe for human occupancy because I cannot identify or exclude the removal mechanism. Wallace looked at me the way clients look at engineers who tell them the foundation might have a problem. Can you give me a probability? No, I have a single data point. 1 event, 1 aircraft, 1 occurrence. Statistical analysis requires repetition. I have none. So you don't know if it's dangerous? I don't know if it's safe. That's a different statement, and it matters. Jaylin Cho had been examining the 737 through my spotting scope during this exchange. She turned from the eyepiece with the expression of someone who has identified a familiar machine and is already running pre-flight checklists in her head. "The APU's been running for a week," she said. "How?" 6 days. It should have exhausted its fuel supply from the main tanks, but the burn rate has been anomalously low, roughly 1/3 of the expected consumption. That's not possible. I'm aware. She looked at Wallace. Wallace looked at me. The 11 other people in the tower cab, a mix of ages, all carrying the specific gauntness and alertness of long-term survivors, looked at various points on the floor and walls and each other. Nobody spoke for a long time. A young man near the back broke the silence. He was maybe 25, black, close-cropped hair, wearing a Portland State sweatshirt with the sleeves cut off. "I'm Marcus's brother," he said. "Terrell? Marcus died getting Dana across the bridge so she could come here and find out if that plane works. If there's a chance it flies, I want to be on it." I understood the arithmetic. I understood that 300 people in a convention center with 2 weeks of food represented a certainty of slow death, and that an aircraft of unknown safety represented a possibility of survival, and that possibilities beat certainties when the certainties are fatal. I'd done this math in 61 investigations. The probable cause is always a moment where someone chose the possible over the known, and the possible turned out to be wrong. But I had never been inside the equation before. I had always arrived after. "I need 48 more hours," I said. "I want to run an atmospheric analysis inside the cabin. I have equipment at the NTSB office that can detect anomalous particulates. If the air is clean, I'll put that in writing." "And if it's not clean?" Wallace asked. "Then I'll put that in writing too." He accepted this because he was a man who understood that proper assessment precedes construction. Jaylin accepted it because she was a pilot who understood pre-flight. Terrell accepted it because Dana put her hand on his arm and nodded. They made camp in the terminal below the tower. I could hear them through the floor voices, movement, the sounds of people organizing a temporary space with the efficiency of practice. Normal sounds, living sounds. I went back to the 737 alone at dawn because the atmospheric testing was not the real reason I needed 48 hours. I needed to open the cockpit logbook to the page I had torn out and see if a new entry had appeared. A new entry had appeared. The page I'd removed was gone, I'd confirmed that. The torn edge still visible in the binding. But the page after it, previously blank, now held a single line in my handwriting. "You showed them the wrong evidence. Show them the envelope." I sat in the captain's seat and read the sentence until the words lost meaning and became shapes and then regained meaning, and the meaning was worse than the meaninglessness. Whoever or whatever was writing in my hand knew what I had done, knew what I had shown Dana, knew what I had withheld. The envelope, the 6-page report, the one that used the word edits. I had not shown it to anyone because it contained a section I have not yet described to you. A section that dealt not with what had happened to Flight 209, but with what was going to happen next. The report's final 2 pages were not retrospective. They were predictive. They described, in my handwriting, in my technical vocabulary, with my formatting conventions, a sequence of events that had not yet occurred. The report predicted that I would be contacted by survivors from the convention center. It named Dana, it named Wallace, it named Jaylin, it named Terrell and described his brother's death on the Glen Jackson Bridge. It predicted that Wallace would propose using the aircraft for evacuation. It predicted that I would request 48 hours for atmospheric testing. All of this was written in my hand, on pages that were sealed inside an envelope in Seat 7A when I boarded the aircraft, which was before Dana knocked on the tower door, before I knew the convention center shelter existed, before Marcus died. The final paragraph of the report read, "The aircraft will fly safely. The mechanism is not residual. It was a single event, targeted, complete. The passengers are not dead. They have been edited into the outbreak. They are the outbreak. The agent is not a pathogen. It is a revision. It needed bodies to propagate, and it found them at altitude where no one could interfere. The plane came home because the agent is finished with it. Let them fly, Nora. It's the only true thing I can give you." Signed in my handwriting, Nora Carver, NTSB. I ran the atmospheric tests. I used the portable gas chromatograph from the NTSB hazmat kit, which could detect particulates down to parts per trillion. I sampled air from every zone of the cabin: forward, mid, aft, cockpit, cargo hold, lavatory, galley. I ran VOC analysis, biological particulate detection, and the broad-spectrum chemical screen we use when we suspect toxic cargo. The air was clean, perfectly, unremarkably, impossibly clean. Cleaner than ambient PDX air, which carried smoke particulates and the chemical residue of uncontrolled fires. The cabin air was filtered, conditioned, and free of any detectable anomaly. The aircraft was, by every measurement I could perform, safe. I returned to the tower with my results, and a decision I'd not yet made, which was whether to show them the envelope. The atmospheric data was clear. The aircraft tested clean. I could certify it, hand the results to Wallace and Jailin, and let them begin evacuation planning based on evidence that was measurable, reproducible, and professionally sound. Or I could show them a document written in my handwriting by something that was not me, predicting events before they happened, claiming the passengers of Flight 209 had been converted into the outbreak itself, and asserting the plane was safe based on the testimony of whatever entity had taken them. One set of evidence was scientific. The other was impossible. Both pointed to the same conclusion: fly the plane. I found Wallace in the terminal, sitting in a gate chair with a paper map of the western United States spread across 3 seats, penciling potential routes. He looked up when I approached, and I saw in his face the expression I've seen in the faces of airline executives, waiting for my preliminary findings. The need to know combined with the fear of knowing. "The air is clean," I said. "And?" "And I have something else you need to see." I handed him the envelope. Wallace read the 6 pages in the terminal gate area while 11 people watched his face the way people watch a seismograph. When he finished, he handed the pages to Jailin without comment. Jailin read them with the rapid, systematic eye movement of someone trained to process checklists under pressure. Then she looked at me. "This is your handwriting." "Yes." "But you didn't write it." "No." "How do you know?" "Because I was in the tower when the plane landed. Because the pages were sealed in an envelope in Seat 7A before I ever boarded. Because the report predicts events that hadn't happened yet, including your arrival. By name." Jailin set the pages down on the gate counter and placed both hands flat beside them, fingers spread, the posture of someone grounding themselves against vertigo. "It knows my name. It knows everyone's name. It knew Marcus would die on the bridge. It knew the exact sequence of every interaction I've had since opening that cabin door." The room divided. I could feel it happen the way you feel a structure shift, not visually, but through some proprioceptive awareness of load redistribution. Terrell stepped forward. A woman I hadn't met, mid-40s, Southeast Asian, introduced later as Mein Nguyen, former ER nurse, stepped back. Wallace remained exactly where he was, center of gravity unmoved, watching the division form around him. "If it knows all of that," Terrell said, "then it's telling the truth about the plane being safe." "Or it wants us on the plane," Mai said. "For what purpose?" Wallace asked. His voice carried the flat neutrality of a man weighing load tolerances. "If the mechanism wanted more bodies, it wouldn't need to lure them. The outbreak is already everywhere. It doesn't need a plane." "That's an assumption," I said. "We're assuming the mechanism operates on logic we can access." "Ms. Carver." Wallace folded the map with 3 precise movements. "You have 2 pieces of evidence. Your atmospheric testing says the plane is clean. This document, which you cannot explain, also says the plane is clean. Do you have any evidence from any source that the plane is dangerous?" "No." "Then what is your professional recommendation?" "I have been asked that question at the conclusion of 61 investigations. The answer has always emerged from the evidence, because the evidence is what I serve. My personal feelings, my intuition, my discomfort, none of these appear on NTSB Form 6120.1. The form asks for findings, probable cause, and safety recommendations based on the factual record. The factual record said the plane was clean. The impossible record agreed. My recommendation is that the aircraft is suitable for a single evaluation flight with minimal crew, to assess handling characteristics and system reliability before any passenger operation." Jaylin nodded. "I'll fly it. I need a co-pilot." "You need a flight engineer too," said a voice from the back. A man I hadn't noticed before, tall, weathered, maybe 55, stepped forward from behind a pillar where he'd been leaning. "I'm Glenn Oshiro. I was a maintenance supervisor for Horizon Air before all this. I can monitor systems from the jump seat." "Were you at the convention center?" I asked, because I did not recognize him from the group that had arrived with Wallace. "No. I've been in Hangar 4 since the 2nd week. Saw you going back and forth to the plane. Figured I'd wait and see who else showed up. Another person, surviving alone, parallel to me, invisible until now. The airport had hidden us both, and neither of us had known about the other. I felt something shift in my understanding, not of the aircraft or the outbreak, but of the assumption that I had been the only one watching, the only one processing, the only investigator in the wreckage. "Hangar 4 has fuel equipment," Glenn said. "I can get the 737 fueled by tomorrow evening, if the hydrant system still has pressure." Wallace looked at me. I nodded. "Do it," Wallace said. Terrell volunteered for the evaluation flight before anyone asked. "Marcus died for this," he said. "I'm going up." It took Glenn 31 hours to fuel the aircraft. The hydrant system was dead, but he jury-rigged a gravity feed from a fuel truck he'd been maintaining in Hangar 4. Keeping it operational, he said, because maintaining equipment was how he maintained himself. And he'd rather die with greased hands than clean ones. He pumped 42,000 pounds of Jet A into the 737's wing tanks, while Jaylin ran her own pre-flight, and I conducted a second full inspection of the cabin. I found no new entries in the cockpit logbook. I checked every page. Whatever had been writing in my hand had either said everything it intended to say or was waiting for something I hadn't done yet. The evaluation flight launched at 06:14 the following morning. Jaylin in the left seat, Glenn on the jump seat monitoring systems, Terrell in the cabin, specifically in seat 7A. Because he insisted, because he said that's where the message was left, and that's where he wanted to be when the mechanism either kept its promise or broke it. I watched from the tower with the spotting scope pressed to my eye and the radio tuned to the frequency Jaylin had set. Dana stood beside me, binoculars up, her breath shallow and controlled the way a paramedic's breath gets when she's waiting for a patient to either stabilize or code. The 737 taxied to runway 28L. Jaylin's voice on the radio was calm, procedural, military crisp. Tower, or whoever's listening, Alaska 209er Heavy, is rolling 28 left. The engine spooled. The aircraft accelerated. At rotation speed, Jaylin pulled back, and the 737 lifted into a morning sky that was gray and clear and empty of everything except the aircraft, and whatever the aircraft contained or did not contain. They climbed to 10,000 feet. Jaylin flew a racetrack pattern over the Columbia River, running system checks, calling out parameters. Glenn confirmed every readout. Terrell reported from the cabin at 5-minute intervals, his voice on the radio carrying the specific tension of a man who has chosen to be a test subject and is performing that role with more courage than comfort. Cabin's normal, air feels normal, nothing weird. Overhead bins still closed. Coffee's gone cold finally. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3. The aircraft performed exactly as specified. Every system nominal. No anomalies, no atmospheric fluctuation, no weight changes on the FDR, which I was monitoring remotely through a data link Glenn had established between the aircraft and the tower's surviving avionics console. At the 3-hour mark, Jaylin broke from the procedural cadence. "Nora, I need to tell you something." My hand tightened on the radio. "Go ahead." "There's writing on the windscreen. It wasn't there during pre-flight. It appeared about 20 minutes ago, and I didn't report it immediately because I was processing." "What does it say?" "It says, 'The children first. They're lightest on the revision.' It's in your handwriting, Nora. I've seen your reports. It's yours." Donna looked at me. I looked at the radar display, which showed the 737's transponder target circling steadily over the river. "Jaylin, is the aircraft flyable?" "Affirmative. She flies better than anything I've taken up. Better than the C-17S. It's like the aircraft wants to be flown." "Bring it home." The 737 landed at 0947 without incident. Jaylin taxied to the gate, shut down the engines, and walked off the aircraft with the controlled stride of a pilot who has just completed a mission she cannot classify. Glenn followed, wiping his hands on a rag, looking at the engine nacelles the way a mechanic looks at an engine that ran too well. Terrell came down the air bridge last. He stopped in front of me and held out his phone. On the screen was a photo he'd taken of seat 7A's window. Condensation had formed on the inside of the pane, and something had drawn in the moisture with a fingertip. A smiley face. Below it, in block letters, "Hurry." "I'm not going to pretend that's not terrifying," Terrell said. But it also kept its word. The air was clean. The plane flew. I'm alive. He was right about all 3 facts. The question was whether facts were enough. Wallace organized the evacuation with the same structural methodology he'd used to keep 300 people alive for 30 days. He divided the shelter population into 2 flight groups. Group A, 162 people, including all 40 children, would depart first. Group B, the remaining 147, would depart on the return flight. He assigned seats. He built a manifest. He established a boarding procedure that accounted for the infected presence along the bicycle route from the convention center to the airport. The transit operation took 2 days. Wallace moved people in groups of 15, each group escorted by 4 of the shelter's designated security volunteers, men and women, who carried baseball bats and garden tools, and, in 2 cases, actual firearms along a route that Dana and I had verified from the tower as the lowest risk corridor available. They lost 1 person. an elderly man named Arthur Dean, who fell from his bicycle on the Marine Drive overpass and could not be helped before 3 infected emerged from beneath the bridge deck. The security team made the decision to keep moving. Dana told me this with the clinical flatness of a paramedic who has triaged beyond her capacity to feel each individual loss. And I recognize the tone because it is the tone I use when I list casualties in the narrative section of a crash report. Professional distance as survival mechanism. We are similar, Donna and I, in ways that I did not want to examine, because examining them would make me feel something about her. And I could not afford to feel things about people who might be edited out of an aircraft at 37,000 feet. Group A assembled in the terminal on a Wednesday morning. 162 people, 40 of them children, carrying what they could hold. Wallace had enforced a strict weight limit, 1 bag per person, 20 pounds maximum, because Jaylin had calculated fuel requirements for a Portland to Boise flight, and the margins were not generous. I stood at the gate and watched them board. Families, singles, couples holding hands. An old woman in a wheelchair pushed by a teenage boy who might have been her grandson. A man carrying a cat in a pillowcase, because Wallace had not specifically prohibited cats, and the man had apparently decided to test this ambiguity. The children boarded first, as the writing on the windscreen had instructed. I watched Jaylin count heads from the cockpit door, and I watched Glenn check seat assignments against the manifest. And I watched Terrell help a girl of maybe 6 into seat 14C, the seat where I had pressed my palm and felt impossible warmth on my first night aboard, and buckle her seat belt with hands that were gentle and steady. Then Wallace turned to me. "You're on this flight." "No, I'm staying for Group B." "You're the investigator. If something happens in the air, you're the only one who might understand it. If something happens in the air, understanding it won't help." "Miss Carver, I am not asking." I looked at the aircraft. 162 people inside. 40 children. The cabin lights were on, the air was conditioned, the engines were running with the quiet reliability of machines that do not know the world has ended. Everything about the scene was normal. Everything about it was impossible. "There's a document in the tower," I said, "on the console next to the radar display. If we don't come back, it's the complete record. CVR transcripts, FDR data, atmospheric analysis, the envelope, everything. Dana will secure it." Dana, who was standing behind Wallace, nodded. She would be on the second flight. She and Wallace and Glenn and the remaining 144 people would wait at the airport for Jaylin to return. I boarded. I took seat 7A because no one else had claimed it, and because whatever had written to me from inside this aircraft had placed the envelope there, and I felt, without evidence, that sitting in that seat might maintain whatever channel of communication existed between me and the thing that said it was me. The door closed. The air bridge retracted. Jaylin's voice came over the cabin PA. "Flight time to Boise approximately 90 minutes. Keep your seatbelts on the whole way." The engine spooled up. I pressed my palm flat against the window and felt the glass vibrate as the aircraft began to move. We climbed through 10,000 feet, and nothing happened. We passed through 20,000 feet, and nothing happened. We leveled at 31,000 feet. Jaylin's chosen cruise altitude based on fuel economy and winds aloft. And nothing happened. And the nothing was worse than something would have been, because it left all 162 of us suspended in the specific terror of waiting for a thing that might not come. The children adapted first. They always do. Within 30 minutes of reaching cruise, I could hear conversations starting, seats creaking, the soft percussion of a child kicking a seat back. A boy across the aisle from me, 8, maybe 9, wearing a blazer's cap 2 sizes too large, pressed his face to the window and said to no one in particular, "I can see Mount Hood." I looked. He was right. The mountain stood above the cloud layer to the south, white and indifferent. And for a moment the cabin was just a cabin, and the flight was just a flight, and the world below, with its emptied cities and its edited population and its mechanism that I could not name, was just landscape. Then the writing appeared on my window. Not on the outside, not in condensation. On the inside surface of the inner pane, forming as though an invisible finger were tracing letters in a medium I could not see. The letters were small and precise, and they were in my handwriting. "Ask me what you actually want to know." I pressed the call button. Not the flight attendant call. There were no flight attendants. The intercom button that Jaylin had configured to connect all seats to the cockpit. "Jaylin, my window." "I see it. It's on the windscreen too, same thing. It's waiting." 162 people on an aircraft with an entity that could write on glass and edit human beings out of pressurized cabins and predict the future and knew everyone's name. I had a choice. I could not ask. I could sit in silence for the remaining 68 minutes and land in Boise and never know. I leaned close to the window and spoke quietly, though I do not know why I assumed proximity mattered to something that existed inside the structure of the aircraft itself. What happened to the passengers? The letters faded. New ones formed. They became what was needed. The outbreak is an infection. It's personnel. Personnel for what? Revision. The world as it was is a draft. We're editing it. The passengers volunteered. They didn't volunteer. I heard the CVR. The captain was terrified. He was terrified of the transition, not of the purpose. Everyone is afraid of the door. No one regrets the room. The boy in the blazer's cap was watching me talk to a window. His eyes were wide but not frightened. Children process the impossible differently. They don't have the architecture of the expected to demolish first. "Are you going to take the people on this plane?" "No, I told you. It was a single event. The draft needed a specific number. We have them. The revision is underway. The plane came home because I wanted you to understand." "Why me?" "Because you listen to black boxes. Because you reconstruct what happened from what's left behind. Because someone needed to file the report, and you're the only investigator still at your desk." I sat back. The letters remained on the glass, patient, legible, written in a hand I had spent 47 years developing. The outbreak, the infected, are they part of the revision? They're the rough draft, imprecise, blunt. They'll fade when the revision is complete. Months, not years. The world after will not remember them as a plague. It will remember them as a season. And the people who died? Everyone who died is dead, Nora. I can't revise that. I can only revise what comes next. That's not good enough. No, it isn't. That's why the plane came home, so at least one person would know the cost and write it down. The letters faded. The window was glass again, cold and clear, and through it I could see the high desert of eastern Oregon sliding past below, patient and brown, and utterly indifferent to the conversation I had just had with something that wore my handwriting like a borrowed coat. Mountain Home Air Force Base was real. The military safe zone was real. I could see it from the descent perimeter fencing, vehicle patrols, lights, organized structures, the unmistakable geometry of institutional survival. Jaylin brought the 737 in on a runway that had been cleared of debris and marked with orange panels, and as the wheels touched down, 162 people made a sound I had not heard in 34 days. Collective relief. Not cheering, not sobbing. A single exhalation, shared, the involuntary release of held breath from 162 sets of lungs simultaneously. Military personnel met the aircraft. Organized, armed, professional. A colonel named Reeves boarded through the forward door and conducted a head count, while medical teams set up a triage line on the tarmac. The process was efficient and calm, and entirely unlike anything I'd experienced since March 14th, which was the last day the world operated on procedures that everyone agreed on. Jalen refueled. Glenn inspected the aircraft with the base's maintenance crew. 2 hours after landing, the 737 was ready to return to Portland for Group B. I was not on the return flight because Colonel Reeves detained me the moment he saw my NTSB identification. "You're an accident investigator?" "Yes." "We need you. We've had 9 aircraft arrive in the last 2 weeks. 3 of them empty. 2 with partial passenger loads, people missing from sealed cabins mid-flight. The other 4 landed with everyone aboard and no anomalies." "What's the pattern?" "We don't have one. That's why we need you." He led me to a hangar where the 3 empty aircraft were parked, 2 737s and a regional jet, all Alaska Airlines, all originating from Pacific Northwest airports. All had the same evidence profile. Warm seats, personal effects in place, no signs of struggle, flight data showing instantaneous weight reduction consistent with the removal of all human mass. I spent 6 hours examining those aircraft while the 737 flew back to Portland and returned with the remaining survivors. I was in the cockpit of the regional jet when Dana found me, still in her Red Cross vest, carrying a field medical kit and looking for me with the specific determination of someone who has decided that proximity to a particular person matters. "Everyone's here," she said. "Both flights, no incidents. Wallace is already organizing quarters." "Good." "You're not coming out of this hangar, are you?" "Not yet." She sat in the first officer's seat and watched me work. I was comparing FDR data across the 3 empty aircraft, looking for the 11-second anomaly, looking for the atmospheric signature, looking for the pattern that Colonel Reeves didn't have, and that I was beginning to believe I did have, but was not yet ready to articulate. The pattern was this. Every empty aircraft had been over the Pacific at the time of the event. Every aircraft that landed with its passengers intact had been over land. The mechanism, the revision, the editing, whatever the entity on my window had called it, operated only over open water, away from witnesses, away from interference, the ocean as operating theater. I wrote this finding on a legal pad in handwriting that was mine because I was the one writing it, and for the first time in days, I was certain of the authorship. Dana read it over my shoulder. "So the plane is safe over land?" "Over land, yes. I would not fly it over open water." "Nora." She put her hand on the legal pad, on my handwriting, on the finding I'd produced through evidence and analysis, and the methodology I've spent 22 years refining. "Is any of this going to make sense? Ever?" "No." "Are you okay with that?" I thought about the captain's last words. "Tell Anne I wasn't scared." I thought about the smiley face in condensation and the coloring book with the purple crayon trailing off the elephant's ear. I thought about the entity that wrote in my hand and called the dead irrevocable, and called the outbreak a rough draft, and told me the plane came home so someone would know the cost. "No," I said, "but I'm going to keep filing reports." She nodded. "That's probably enough." I still have the envelope. 6 pages in my handwriting that I did not write, filed now in a secure evidence locker at Mountain Home Air Force Base, alongside the cockpit voice recordings, the flight data, and the coloring book from Seat 19. Colonel Reeves classified the entire file. I told him classification wouldn't help. The entity that authored those pages doesn't care about clearance levels. Jay Lin flew 11 more evacuation flights over the following weeks, all over land, all without incident. The infected thinned, exactly as predicted, fading like a season. The world began its slow, confused reconstruction. And nobody called it a revision because nobody had read the report except me and Dana and Wallace and a colonel who locked it in a vault. I file reports now for the reconstituted NTSB, working from a desk in a repurposed hangar. Normal work. Mechanical failures, bird strikes, runway incursions. I am good at my job. I listen to black boxes and I write down what happened. But sometimes, on mornings when the light hits my office window at a certain angle, letters appear briefly in the glass. Small, precise, in my handwriting. They always say the same thing. Good. Keep writing. Then they fade, and I do.